Few things are as special to me as a conversation at Theory Underground wherein Mikey gets to ask Todd questions. I think Mikey might be the most devoted student of Todd McGowan's work, and he asks the best questions. Their focus in this conversation is on the concept of the gaze. But with that said, we also get into religion and its relation to theory, because this conversation took place at the end of an epic marathon stream that also included guests such as Dwayne Roussel, Peter Rollins, Samuel Loncar, Daniel Garner, Malcolm Collins, and Adrian Johnston, all of whom have very different approaches to the question of religion and theology versus atheism and philosophy. But we go further than just this into the question of using psychoanalysis for social theory as opposed to the clinic. If you're interested in finding out more about Theory Underground, getting involved, or supporting this work, stick around until the end of the video for the PSA we will play then. Also, at some point halfway through this video, I have placed a very important ad for an upcoming course. If you listen to part of this episode and want to finish it later, make sure to add to your watch later playlist or just leave it playing on repeat in the background for the rest of the week. You know, for the algorithm. And more importantly, to take active control over programming the background conditions of your own environment. Enjoy. All right, everybody. Welcome back to Theory Underground. I'm your host, David McKerracher. This time we've got two co-hosts and a guest, or is it one co-host, Nance, and then we've got two guests, it's Mikey and Todd. I can't even tell at this point. Welcome, everybody. How you all doing?
I'm good. How are you? It's great to see you, David. And Nance and Mikey, everybody.
Yeah,
feeling fantastic. I've been going hard since 3 a.m. drinking decaf coffee, and I just couldn't be happier. You know,
it's impressive, man. I've been dipping in. It's really you seem your energy level has stayed pretty constant, so it's pretty good.
Yeah, and for the people listening who are listening to this outside of the context of the stream, this has been going on, as I said, all day. But it's this I don't know, what do we call it? Epic marathon broadcast, right? And I think I was energy-wise totally fine, and I was lucid and sharp, and I was able to stay on top of everything. But the moment that internet problem happened and I had to start the third stream and resend everything out to socials and stuff, it's like I got broken. So I'm going to kind of hand the reins off here to Mikey. I'm going to go refill my water bottle. I'm listening, but so good to have you here, Todd. We're going to dive into Mikey's questions first, then I'll bring in my questions.
Okay, cool.
That's if I allow you to have any time left for your questions. Okay, Todd. So what I kind of wanted to go over. So this summer, you're teaching a course on Seminar 11 with us at Theory Underground. We're all psyched. Have we decided, is it 4 or 5 weeks?
I thought it was 4, but whatever.
Whatever.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, because I'm looking at seminar.
It is 4.
Say what?
It is 4, but I just want to say that, you know, we can we'll milk whatever we can get out of you, you know. So
there's 5 main sections though. Unconscious and repetition, of the gaze as objet petit a, the transference and the drive, the field of the other, and back to the transference. Wait. Oh no, there's 4, and because there's the to conclude, and that's one session. Right. Okay, so basically, you know, I listened to the new episode of Why Theory, where you guys are talking about Kant. You're getting into critique of pure reason. I saw your new video on the gaze, and I'm really happy because you already did a video on the gaze.
Yeah.
And it was more cinema focused. Yeah. And this new one really unlocked. I've told you before, like, gaze is this concept of Lacan's. I think it might be the one that's been the trickiest for me to get.
It's very hard, I think. I mean, I had some students, so I did it because I'm teaching a kind of half a class this semester, and I wanted to we wanted to go over the gaze as a concept, and I cannot assign my own text, my own writing, and I couldn't find a piece of writing that went through just Lacan's own examples in a system. Lacan you can't assign because that's it would be impossible. I mean, you could assign it in a whole class on Lacan, but you can't just do it in a week. So I spent the whole weekend making up that video, and just because of that, just because I thought there was this lacuna, and then I thought that the other video I have on it, I looked at it briefly to the extent that I can even look at myself, and I found it very dissatisfying, and it was so cinema focused, and the examples played on too long, and I wanted someone to talk about ambassadors, Petitjean, and Las Meninas, and so I did that.
No, and those examples, it's the first time, like in this, I mean, you do a lot in that video that clarified a lot, but it's the first time I feel like I have any idea of what the hell was going on with the fucking sardine can. Because I mean, Lacanians, this is one of these areas where your typical hyper intellectual Lacanian is not going to clarify anything on this. And in fact, they're probably going to make it more confusing.
Well, it's interesting because there's I'm not going to say the person's name, but there's a really famous person that takes Petitjean's word when he goes, "Do you see that can? It doesn't see you." And this person kind of goes off on that and says, but then Lacan corrects him and goes, "But all the same, it did see me," right? So that there's a whole line of, and this is an important reading of the gaze that gets misdirected because they take Petitjean's word and not Lacan's corrective of that. So I think that you're right. Like there's that little apologue has been really, I think, not delved into, and it doesn't. I think you're right. Like ambassadors sort of makes immediate sense, right? So in my class, I had, because the students didn't want to do it. They're like, "Oh yeah, we see the skull." I'm like, "No, you come up to the front, you look right down the line of the painting, and I want you to see it." And one of them goes, "I got it." I said, "No, you didn't." I said, "Get right onto because you have to really look right. You have to be right in line with the thing and looking down." I once was teaching at Loyola Marymount University, and there was an administrative assistant there, and she's like, "What is the deal with this painting? What's this thing?" I said, "Come here, I'll show it to you." And it literally took 15 minutes. I'm like, "Now get really," and she just couldn't. She couldn't. "I don't see it." She's like, "I don't see it. I don't see it." So finally, she saw it, and it was such a great, and this is why I think it's such a great example. This great moment where she's like, "Oh my God!" It was just this really transformative thing. So that painting, I think, makes sense to people. But the sardine can, I just don't think it's maybe not even a great example on Lacan's part, right? Because it doesn't make this immediate sense, and it has to do with human waste and the productive process, and it's even a sort of a critique of it's a critique of himself, which I like about it, and it's a critique of the capitalist process of production too. So it's very interesting, but it's not immediately. It's not intuitive in the way I think ambassadors and even Las Meninas to another extent is.
Yeah, and so for context for everybody watching, the reason I want to kind of focus in on gaze right now is, like I said, Todd's going to be teaching this course coming up this summer on Seminar 11. This is, I think, most Lacanians would agree, the fundamental teaching of Lacan. He goes back to basics, and he's laying out the 4 fundamental concepts. When it comes time for the course, I mean, we can have a discussion.
It is the text. It's the text.
Yes.
There's not even a close second. Really.
But do you like, part of it is what's interesting. So there's the 4 fundamental concepts, and yet gaze as objet is stuck right there in the middle.
Yeah.
Almost this 5th key concept in the text.
Yeah.
And I guess I do want to talk about gaze. I kind of want to. I don't want to get lost on just the fundamental basics of it, because you're going to go through those in the course. And I would recommend, if you really want to follow what we're going to talk about for a minute, go watch Todd's new video. Todd, I will say, because I haven't checked, do us a favor though. Don't take the original gaze video down though. Like leave them both.
I won't. Yeah,
okay.
I'll leave it up.
Because you do, like, it's almost where you watch the new one first, and then you get a whole lot out of the older one.
Right. Maybe that's true. Yeah. Yeah.
So
I mean, the filmic examples are different, right? So that's why, I mean, the other one's mostly on Vertigo, I think, and maybe a little bit on Citizen Kane. This one, the film
I really
example,
like the
Silence of
example from is it Drive?
Oh yeah, that's right. There was
Ryan
a Drive
is it
example in
Gosling?
there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
elevator.
yeah. That's a great moment. Yeah.
So here's the thing, like, so because I've always struggled with this concept, and I feel like how your video on Phallus really unlocked what the hell's really going on with it, where you can start to make sense of it in this broader sense of your life world or whatever. I feel like the new video on gaze has done that for me, but I still kind of want to walk over some of the basics and then ask you some more questions that get into more detailed connections to other stuff with the gaze. And so, first off, I mean, anybody, when you hear us talking about the gaze, you think it means somebody looking at you, the look, right? And what's confusing is that there is a way that this thing called gaze does, you feel like you're being looked at, right? But
Right.
it's when you feel like you're being looked at by an object or some inanimate aspect of the visual field. And I've kind of had these uncanny experiences. I described it one time in, I think it was my Squid Game blog post, but I've gone for walks around my hometown, and it's always these moments where the for me at least, it's when the sun is creating a kind of sky that's phantasmatic. It's not your typical sunset. It's more sunset than your typical sunset. Um, Everything seems serene. It's almost like my kind of decayed old suburb gleams again, and I feel like I've walked into some sort of fantasy of what the suburbs are. Now, the trick is, right, the objective field isn't actually becoming phantasmatic. I'm doing this by how I've already concocted a fantasy,
Right.
that structures my desire of some, especially in some nostalgic way, of old school America, suburbia, right? So the
Right.
point is, when I'm out on these walks and this rare experience happens, I always like it's somewhere from a drain, some dark area, whether it's a drain or it's up in the trees that are the leaves are dark, but there's still sun out, right? There's always some dark spot. And it's this weird feeling that something's taking me into account, something's looking at me, right? But the trick is, what's looking at me is actually my own desire externalized looking back at me. And
Right.
so it's the me out there in my visual field looking back at me. And so it's a bizarre experience, right?
Right.
And so that's why it works to call it the gaze, but we do not want to confuse it with another human subject or even an animal looking at us, right?
Right. Exactly. Like, I like this moment in Rear Window where, so a lot of times, Jimmy Stewart's looking across the thing. He sees a murder. He doesn't actually see it, but he concludes that a murder is taking place. And the Raymond Burr character is, there are moments where he looks right back at him and sees him, and that's not the gaze, right? But the moment where he's looking over there, the whole room's dark, and all you see is his cigarette going, as he's smoking, it's bright and then dark, and then that's the moment. This guy Miran Bozovic has a great essay. It's in the Slavoj, Everything You Ever Want to Know About Lacan, but Afraid to Ask Hitchcock. It's in that collection, and he makes this point. That's the moment of the gaze, right? So it's this moment that, so it does, Jimmy Stewart does feel seen, right, in that moment, and we as a spectator feel seen as well, because it's a film really about our voyeurism. And but you're right, it's not a direct seeing, right? It's more the way in which it's not someone else seeing us. It's the way in which our desire shapes what we see, and like, Lacan's wager is that appears in what we see as an object, right? As a moment that doesn't fit within the rest of that phantasmatic structure. So, like, your example of this perfect suburban evening, it sounded very great, actually. Made me think of, like, walking around my hometown. But I think that like when you fantasize, it tends to hide that element, right? But then there'll be this moment where it shines, it comes through, where you're like, wait a minute, something's a little off in this fantasy, and then you realize, wait a minute, this is all here for me to look at. And I think usually the reason why it doesn't happen in art or film, I mean, it does in art and film and not in real life, is because we look in the real world and we say, oh, this is just all there, right? It's not like that. It's not constructed for us to look at. It's just there. But of course, that's not true, right? Like every building we walk into is made for us to look at, right? But we don't see that. We think, oh, there's just a building there, and they just put it up, and it's just there. And I think one of the great things about this concept, I think it's maybe Lacan at his, I might say this in that video, like his dialectical best, because it connects this objective thing with our own subjective position as a someone looking at something, right? But I think your emphasis on this distinction between look and gaze is really, really important. So what you hear called the female gaze is really, I don't think it's a bad theory. I mean, I think there's something to it. Clearly, sorry, that was a funny slip. The male gaze. What you hear called that is I would call it the male look. And I think if Laura Mulvey, who's the famous theorist of this idea, if she had said the male look, that would have really helped to not create this confusion with Lacan. I mean, she did, to be fair, she wrote her essay Visual Pleasure in Narrative Cinema in 1974, which is a couple years before the Four Fundamental Concepts had even been published, and she would never have gone to it, and she didn't have access to the manuscript. So she's using the mirror stage essay as the basis for that conception of the gaze. And so the idea is that there's a mastery over the visual field. And then Lacan's point is the gaze is actually the mark of our non-mastery over that field. So the point at which all of a sudden we're like, wait a minute, I'm actually involved in this thing. I'm not separate and have mastery over it. And I think most of the time we like to think we have mastery over our visual field. Like, even though we didn't build the building, we walk in and we know what's what, and we can find our way about, and we're not endangered by what unless you're, on the front in some war or something, you're not endangered by the thing that you're seeing. Instead, you're not involved in it. It's just distant. And I think the gaze collapses that distance, which is why it's so great. It's dialectical. And that's, in a certain way, all of Hegel's philosophy is about collapsing that distance between the subject and the object.
So a couple things come to mind. I mean, on the one hand, like, I guess this experience that I've had walking around, and again, like trying to kind of phenomenologically describe it, it is. It's when it's in the evening and the sun is lighting, shooting between the houses. You don't see the rot of this old suburbia, right? Everything, right, for a moment, because it's almost like the lighting of the sun and the purple and the orange in the sky. Everything that's decayed gets somewhat concealed, and it's like I stepped into this fantasy space. And the weird thing is, I think these moments are kind of the fundamental grounding of a lot of religious experiences, because what you think initially is, it's like the objective world is making itself look the way I want it to look, like it's doing it. And it's almost like there's something transcendent beyond me that's actively producing this for me. The trick is to realize, no, I'm the one making this sublime. Like, it's my unconscious desire and my fantasy. Like, this is just the sun going down. But for me, because how I've painted suburbia in my mind, this just so happens to align itself to my unconscious fantasy frame, which structures my desire. And so it appears like objective reality, or you could call it God, is doing something for me, when in fact I'm the one doing it. And that's the key dimension of this, is gaze because we can start, if somebody goes, okay, be like analytic philosophers for a moment and start giving us these precise definitions of gaze. You and I both, we're going to give like 15 probably, because there's so many. It's objet petit a. It's how desire transcendentally structures the empirical fit. Like, there's all these And
how it curves the field of perception, right? Like it's that too. It's so I think you're right. Like we can give definitions till the cows come home, probably too many, right? Yeah.
And so I guess, okay, part of it is, and I know how you do, because if you bring in all the technical terms and you bring in every valence that belongs to get, you lose everybody. So what you've always been able to do is go, okay, like if I try to do all of this in one attempt, it just becomes verbiage. So the point though is the gaze is objet petit a, in the visual field. What that means, objet petit a, is for Lacan, this is his key concept. And when we're children, at some point through a process of socialization, the idea of no takes hold in us. No, we can't do whatever we want, however we want, whenever we want. There are ways, protocols, etc. We have to conform to those to be a member of the social order, to society. And so we have to give up something in order to be a member of society. The trick is we don't really give up anything, at least not a physical part of ourselves. It's not material. But the point is, since we feel like we've made this fundamental sacrifice, from then on, our subjectivity is structured around this enduring, perpetual sense that we are lacking some fundamental aspect of ourselves. It's like we feel like some core chunk of our being has been chiseled away from us, and it's out there in the world. And ultimately, that's what desire is about. And it tries to find it in specific objects. It never finds it, because the point is this special object, this lost object, this missing object, is merely the reification and externalization of our own lack. It's just our lack, our sense of not being complete, externalized and objectified into what we take to be a missing object. Now, here's the trick, right? Like that's the basic way to talk about objet petit a as the object cause of desire. So for somebody who's not familiar with all this Lacanian terminology, the point is there are specific objects we desire. We all are familiar with this all too well. I want to live in that house. I want to date this person. I want to have this job, right? But the trick is what causes us idiosyncratically to desire the specific objects we desire. Well, this thing is called objet petit a. It's what causes us to desire the objects we desire. And so, but ultimately it's invisible. It doesn't weigh. It doesn't have weight. It's not material. It's just an ontological lack, externalized and reified. So here's the trick though. And this is kind of where this theory of gaze and how it shapes the perceptual field of vision in particular gets a little tricky, because Lacanians basically talk about objet a just as we each have an objet a, and that's it. The problem is we have 4 drives and each drive has its own objet a.
Right.
So my question to you, Todd, is like, okay, we understand that objet petit a as such emerges through this sense of no taking hold, and this sense that we've compromised ourselves or given up a portion of our being, etc. We've on the altar of society in order to be a member. But how do you think this works at the level? Like, how does gaze emerge from the eyes? Like, is it just symbolic castration, the prohibition of the no, that makes this happen to our eyes, where we start to structure? Like, I guess that's what I'm to is.
I mean, I think that it's interesting because as Lacan developed, so it's in Seminar 21, Les Noms du Père, that he says the objet a is what I invented, right? Like he says that's my one thing. But by that time, you're right that so from between Seminars 11 and Seminars 13, so this is like mid 1960s, he does say there's 4 drives and that there's 4 objects. And he says, so Freud has the anal and the oral drive, and I've added the oral, A-U-R-A-L, and the visual drive, right? And thus I've added the gaze and the voice and the gaze, right? But then later it's interesting. So he kind of stops talking about that way of of thinking about object, and he thinks about object much more general terms. And so I guess my answer to you would be that he thinks that there's this that our desire is itself. And I think you're right that there is this moment of conformity, right? We have to adjust to the social demand. But even if we didn't have that, like even if you and I were wild, like Caspar Hauser or whatever his name is, right? Like we still would have this distortion of our desire as long as we were speaking beings. And I think Lacan's idea is that affects every mode of perception. So it's like I think hearing it's equally, maybe even more interesting, right? Because you think about the way my podcast partner Ryan Engley likes to, when he teaches class, he likes to play this group called the Cocteau Twins. Hopefully you're all too young to have heard of them, but they were the big band in the 90s, and their words are basically they're intentionally they are real words, but you look at the lyrics, and even if you look at the lyrics online, they're like, I think they're saying this, but it might be this, because they don't ever tell, right, what the lyrics are. So, but one of their songs goes, "Life is like a cherry cola." So this is called something Ice Station. I forget the name of it. Anyway, it's their best song, but I can't believe I've forgotten the name. Anyway, but the point is, he plays that song in class, and he tells the students, write down what you hear, and they write. And no one ever. It's impossible. No one gets the lyrics right. But the way that they don't get them right, and this is the genius of this group, is it shows their desire, right? So that's how, and that's true about what we see too, right? Like we don't get it right. We don't see what's there because our desire slightly shapes. I mean, it's most obvious I was writing this, so I agreed to write this, Maury Rudy, who's my friend who just died, not actually, so close to a year ago now, asked me to write this Cambridge companion to Lacan with her, and then she died. I got stuck with it. Anyway, I just finished it, and one of the things as I was talking about, so how this works, right? How desire kind of shapes what we see. I thought of when you look at a book, like people will be looking at this bookshelf behind me, right? And they'll see like maybe one thing. They'll be like, what's that Marx on the top? I think there's Marx I don't know what's on there. On the top shelf, there's Kafka on the top shelf. Why are those unopened? I don't know. That's a scandal. But the point is, you're drawn to certain things. My example is, say there's on a bookshelf like Jordan Peterson's, what is it, 7 Rules for Life or 12 Rules? I don't know what it is. And then Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit. Like our eyes are instantly drawn to Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit. We don't even see the Peterson book there unless there's a kind of perversion of our sense of things, right? So I think it's really simple to understand if you think of it that way, right? Like, why do certain things stand out? And I spoke of Maury Rudy. She's like, you go into a bar or wherever, right? Or a room, a bunch of people. And all of us, and you look around and you're like, I could fall for that person, and the rest of these people are just, I could talk to them, but basically they're nothing to me. And I thought that was such a great point about the way desire works, right? Like it's not like you could fall in love with anyone. There's a really, I mean, it's not like she believes in a soulmate, but she believes, and I think rightly, that it's a very, very small scope, and you couldn't even say what it is. Like and this is why I think all these match sites are a little bit off, right? Because you put a list of things you want in a person, but you were mentioning objet, like you can't put the objet on the list, right? Like it's the thing that doesn't fit in the list. So the very thing that would make you fall in love is the thing that gets the person excluded from your list of possibles, right? Or the swipes or whatever you're doing, right? So, I mean, it was worse when I was young and you had to meet people in the flesh, but it was a little better in this way because you had a little bit more opportunity to meet this objet aspect of a person. And now I think that's a little foreclosed, right? So anyway, so that's what I would say. It's like, it's a constant in every perceptual field. It's constantly reshaping it. And I don't think vision is privileged. One of the critiques of Lacan historically was he privileges vision because this mirror stage nonsense, right? So I think that I don't think that's right. I mean, I don't think it's right at all. I think it's true in taste. I mean, taste is obvious, right? Like certain tastes, like certain things just disgust me because they remind me of my mother, right? Like they're like, and her cooking, and they're just, I put it in my mouth, I just have to spit it out. So that's something about objet art in the I don't know what field that is, like the oral field, right? So yeah, so I think it's in every field.
And so and right, so just for the listeners, right, what we're talking about with the gaze is this unconscious activity on each of our parts, right? We're not aware we're doing this. It's this unconscious activity that actually makes it so there's things in the visual field that are desirable to us. The idea is that nothing in the visual field in and of itself is desirable. Right. We're the ones that make what we see desirable to us.
This unconsciously,
right?
Unconsciously, Michael, right? Like that's crucial. Yeah. So absolutely.
This is why in the comments to your video, I kind of went into this and then you responded, but I wanted to actually talk to you more about it. So for me, what light came on from your video here is that this unconscious activity on the part of desire, right? Or which we can call gaze here, right? This is in a way, and I know you're going to do the Hegelian like revision of this, but this is the theory of the gaze is basically Lacan's theory of transcendental desire, which is to say, for Kant, for those who don't know, Kant's huge innovation in the history of philosophy is that he's the first philosopher who really systematically argued that we ourselves are structuring our experience, that it's not like we're blank slates that just stand open to the world and the world just we passively receive the world as it is. For Kant, time, space, causality, substance, these are all categories of the mind that basically are like our software that organizes the raw data of sense experience into coherent, causal, spatial, temporal, substantial experience, right? So we're bringing
even objects. Yeah.
Yes, right. And so we're bringing these forms, these structures to experience. So when we experience something in the empirical world as causal, we take it like it's a pure metaphysics, like that is just how it is outside of us. The transcendental insight is to go, that causal relation you see, that's us putting it there, but it happens unconsciously, which is a priori. And so we're not aware of this synthetic, which is to say this combinatory activity that we're doing, right? And so with gaze, as objet art, the cause of desire, what it's doing is making specific things stand out to us as desirable. It's imbuing desire in the field. But we think that things are just objectively desirable, just like we think things are objectively causal in the Kantians. But the trick is to see how we are actively doing this at an unconscious level. And that's what transcendental means here. We're not talking about transcendence like something outside of our experience, God or the eternal or whatever.
No, in fact, Mikey, Kant explicitly opposes transcendental to transcendent. It's a very, and the words in German, it's nice because this is the case where the German words are just the same as the English words. And so that's I think that's a key, what you just said is a really key point. So he's not, and he even famously says in the second preface to Critique of Pure Reason, I've had to limit knowledge to make room for faith, right? So he's getting rid of the transcendent in knowledge to allow us to then have faith in the transcendent if we can, right? Like, but yeah, what you're saying is, and I think you're exactly right to link Lacan to this Kantian project of, except what is he doing? He's adding the unconscious to so Kant's notion of the transcendental is, you said unconscious, it is what Freud would call descriptively unconscious, right? But it's not unconscious as a faculty. So it's
pre-conscious in some.
Exactly. Because if it wasn't pre-conscious, Kant couldn't go along and write the Critique of Pure Reason. So I think what's great about Lacan, I mean, I have, as you know, I have a lot of critiques, but I think that this is what is really great about him, that he brings, because Freud wasn't a philosopher, right? Freud he wasn't a philosopher. He never read Hegel. He read Nietzsche and then tried to stop. And he read Kant in a kind of non-serious way. And I think that he couldn't think through how you could import these psychoanalytic categories and problems into the philosophical exploration of subjectivity, transcendental subjectivity. And that is Lacan's great, great, great contribution, I think.
And so,
just exactly like you said.
Like the light that came on was this whole thing on gaze is not just, oh, he's talking about the visual. Like it's easy to read it like it's not essential or it's not the key thing. And some part of me sitting there going, no, this is his transcendental psychoanalysis.
Yeah, I think there's something that maybe it's like the key insight in all of his thought. Right? Like maybe, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
For the reason you just said.
Here, I want to read your quote because what I said was, is the gaze just another way to talk about Kantian transcendental activity? I should have specified at the level of desire, not at the level of knowledge. But I said, is Lacan's theory of the gaze his transcendental psychoanalysis? And you said, in a sense, yes, but I would say that it's the point at which Lacan's Kantianism, which is his dominant mode, turns into dialectical Hegelianism. So, and it's because it puts us out there as the object, right?
Right. We're not just inside. Like in a way. Look, I think you mentioned before what Kant's main project is to say there are synthetic a priori judgments possible. That's a lot of jargon, but the idea is that we can make connections between things without relying on sense experience, right? And those connections are valid. And that is a dialectical insight, right? Because it connects things and it shows that, like, in a sense, Kant's trying to say we're out there in the object field, but then the problem is he has this other object field of the Ding an sich, right? Like the thing in itself that's beyond. And one of the things Hegel does is to say, no, there's no field beyond. We're out there as far as you can go. We're involved in this object field, even up to the thing in itself. And that's very controversial. And it's spawned a whole legion of Hegelians who just reject that idea and Kantianized Hegel. This is my favorite joke about this is I tried to read Hegel, but found out that I can't, right? Like that's what a lot of these, I think, I have immense respect for Robert Pippin and Robert Brandom, but I would say that joke applies to their reading of Hegel, right? They Kantian. This is not a point that's original to me, although I think Slavoj took that joke from me and put it in something. But at least he gave me credit. Usually, he takes the joke and it's gone. But I think that that's a really key idea that with the gaze. Isn't Lacan saying we're out there in this object world, not just in this Kantian? It's not just about the transcendental anymore, right? It is about the transcendental, but it's also about the way in which the transcendental is. We're as a transcendental. It shows we're implied in this object world that seems outside of us and neutral. Even things in themselves, like we're out in them. We can't hold on to this. Oh, there's this realm beyond. And I think it's good that you mentioned religion, right? Because there is something, I'm going to put it in a way that's going to sound strange, but I think for Hegel, Kant's too Jewish, right? Like Hegel is a very Christian philosopher in the sense that God comes down to earth in the form of Christ, right? Whereas for Judaism, God has to remain. You can't even say Yahweh. Right, you have to say Adonai. You have to speak only with God's nickname. You can't say the actual name, and you can't certainly write God down. You have to put the little hyphen in the middle, right? So that's a Kantian. I mean, Kant was an anti-Semite. So this is ironic, right? But that's Kant is following from that because there's this outside external thing, and doesn't gaze, as you nicely put it, break down that, and so all of a sudden we're touching God, like all of a sudden I can. It's not just I touch myself. I actually touch God. And I think and God touches me in the gaze. Right. And I think that's what the great, I think you're right to say I didn't think that until you just said it now, but maybe that's the point at which Lacan goes the farthest, right, with gaze, and then that's why he retreats from it. He can't. It's after Seminar 13. There's just not one discussion of gaze. So he has so he talks about that painting Las Meninas, the Velázquez painting, and I don't know if you've read the seminar, but so Foucault is there. I think I mentioned this video. Foucault is there, and Foucault wrote this very, very famous analysis in chapter 1 of Les Mots et les Choses, the order of things. And Lacan's like, incredible. I'm so honored to have Michel Foucault. He knows so much about this painting. And then Lacan goes, in the next session, I'm going to do my analysis, just complimenting Foucault's. And then the next session, Lacan's like, where's Michel Foucault? Like, why isn't he here? And then he proceeds to like completely demolish Foucault's reading the whole time, going, you see how I'm just complimenting what Foucault, just filling in a little gap. It's just like, so it's a typical, he's not a nice guy, Lacan. I mean, that's the other thing about it. It's funny, of course, but it's not nice. And so I think Foucault was probably wise to bail. But it's just funny that he must have unconsciously known I shouldn't come to this session when he's going to really get down to brass tacks.
That's great. Okay.
Mikey.
Yeah.
How many more you got, man?
Well, so I want to wrap. How many?
You want to talk? Hold on. You want to talk about gays for another hour? I mean, I'm down. I mean, let's.
Sorry, guys.
I think what is my gaze telling me in this situation? I'm trying to figure it out. I can't tell, but
care.
I keep noticing this one book above Todd's head. I don't know. No, I'm just kidding. So how many do I have? I don't know. I think Mikey's going to come back in with a few. I'm just going to come in here with a few and kind of stir the pot up a little bit, and then we'll see what happens. But basically, the thing I wanted to say about gays really quick is, Nance, do you feel like it's becoming more clear as a concept? Because I remember when we read the introduction to Todd's book on cinema and gays, we were confused as hell. Or at least we were really struggling.
Yeah, I think no, I think there's some like small inkling of definitely not understanding, but like, yeah, I kind of get that. I can smell what you're stepping in a little bit.
It's very safe the way you put that, because when we had Dwayne Roussel on today, he was saying there is no understanding. As soon as you think that you're understanding, you're fucked. And so, no, we don't understand, but we can smell it. So that's good enough. Yeah, for sure. 100%. Okay. Well, and I want to
help David Nance. Do you guys think it would help with this concept if we called it something besides gays, if it had a different name?
I do think that would lead to less initial confusion, because like initially it does feel like it's other people looking at me, it's how I appear.
Yeah, like the semiotic, like if you do the Derridian or Saussurian thing, okay, so you have the word gaze, and then in the structure of long or language, it's like if you go, well, what does gaze mean? You want to do the Derridian Saussurian thing, and you go to it means look, it means to be perceived, it means blah 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 blah, and that cloud of semiotic elements constantly bends you back away from what Lacan is actually trying to tell you with. Todd, if you had to come up with a different term for this particular concept, what would you call it if we don't call it gaze?
Well, the visual object, I think. I mean, that would just be the simplest thing, I think. The visual object, right? Yeah. Something like that. Yeah.
But then the trick is, right?
It's not actually an object. I mean, I don't think there's any easy solution, because even objet, I hate jargon. And so I wish we didn't have that term. I mean, I wish Lacan, my advice to every thinker is never invent a term. And this is what I love about Hegel. Like he's hard to read, right? Like Hegel's hard, but he never invents a single word. So you read Martin Heidegger, you're like, how many really? How many are you going to invent? And then Lacan, like, jouissance, I don't know, la langue. Come on. I just find that just uninteresting and lazy and just, yeah. So I appreciate in French it's le regard. I appreciate it because he actually uses a real word and it's a simple word. So I don't know that I don't think you can improve it. I just think it's
so one of his famous statements from Seminar 10, he says the awe, or the objet petit a, desires, support, and fantasy isn't visible in what constitutes for man the image of his desire, which is to say, it's an invisible object, right?
Right. There you go. Yeah. There you go. That's the problem. Yeah.
Sorry, that's tricky, but
yeah.
There you go.
I want to first of all just stick up for the invention of new words. I think that we need to get outside of words that are if a word has several different meanings and these are hotly contested and they trigger people at a gut sort of level that is like pre-rational, and it actually shuts down the ability to be rational, then I say, let's steer away from that word. And
Dave, I don't object to that, but my point is, don't invent a whole new, use a different word that exists. My point, English has a million words. Like, just choose one that already exists. We don't need to invent. French is impoverished in terms of number of words, but still, you didn't need to invent it. But I don't disagree with what you just said at all. That seems to me evidently true.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. All right, then we're all good. We're all good then.
Works. You did something by putting time and energy together, but it doesn't leave us for years. Objet, body without organs. I still.
No.
It doesn't do that.
Those are real words, David. They're real words. Time and energy. They're real words.
And I also wanted them to be intuitive and get to what's prior to everyone thinking, I don't have time and energy. Right. Okay. You all know. Okay. So, and by the way, Todd, Slavoj Žižek wrote a preface or a foreword for Timenergy. So the second edition is coming out soon. I just wanted to let you know.
That's great. Yeah. That's nice of him. Yeah.
I feel like he knighted me, Yeah. And it even pertains to the actual work. It's not just something that he kind of.
It's amazing. Yeah. It's hard for him to do.
Yeah. A lot of times his forewords are kind of just like something else that he puts there,
Yeah. Right.
Okay. So today we've had on a lot of guests, and probably half of them are Lacanians, of various stripes. And noteworthy Leon Brenner, Dwayne Roussel, and Adrian Johnston. So this was a really cool day in that sense. And I've been asking everybody some set of questions. They're all related. It has to do with science and religion and epistemology and theory. And philosophically, what we're doing when we theorize using concepts. Now, I think it was Brenner who originally brought this up. It wasn't even like his main agenda in the conversation. It was just kind of a thing, because I was kind of like, okay, trying to get down into like, what is this thing? And he was kind of like, well, and he kind of started talking about the definition is less important when he's talking about the clinical structures, because really what matters in this case is the position that the analyst takes up in reference to the analyst's stand, and how that whole relationship there, it needs to be different if the analyst is dealing with, say, a pervert as opposed to a psychotic. You don't treat the neurotic like the psychotic. You got to have some kind of an idea of like what their position is vis-a-vis language and repression and all of these other things, right? And so, that's I'll hopefully be able to put it in better terms after this course he's going to teach and all of that. But with that said, that raised this sort of can of worms. Now he's very, he's friendly to Ljubljana School. He's friendly to everything that you do. He loves you. He loves what you do.
He's friendly to me. Yeah, that's true.
But it's not always that way. In fact, the thing is like he's doing this as like a sort of like, hey, we could all get along, but the definition of these concepts is the relationship you take up in the clinic. And so as soon as you're doing stuff in the social, it's like you're dealing with a different kind of concept. Now it has to be defined. It's not about your position in that relationship. And so and I'm saying that that's a very fair way to do it. Mikey, I want to set you up here just to kind of give us all a little taste here of what you've been put through as trying to be a warehouse working nobody guy who wants to understand these concepts, who writes about these concepts, who gets people who spit on you, more or less, right? Who think you shouldn't do that. In fact, you can't do that. Is that fair? Or how would you characterize it?
So here's the thing. Over the years, I have had run-ins with clinical Lacanians online that, and there's been numerous of these, and there's a specific group of them. I'm not naming names. I don't like that cancel or go harass them or call them, fuck all that shit. They just fundamentally disagree with me and Todd and Slavoj and Dwayne and Adrian, and like you go down the list. It's, I'm over on that side. That's as clear as day with Todd and Slavoj and Adrian, and right. Okay. So but this isn't like it sounds like I'm doing a straw man version of this, but no, they hold this line. Leon's in the middle, and I respect what he's doing, but these card carrying Lacanian analysts, they really believe that what Lacanian theorists are doing is trash, and they a lot of them will tell you they've told me that what I do on my blog is trash, what Todd does is trash, what Žižek does is trash, and that these concepts are only meaningful within the confines of clinical experience, and that's the only place they have meaning. And so I've had my online debates with these guys over the years, not anymore, but at one point, like I was on there defending Todd and Slavoj and all the rest of them, right? And so they just are completely dismissive of everything that Lacanians, especially those of us inspired by Žižek, do with social theory, with ideology, with politics, with cinema, right? Cinema studies.
The program will resume shortly, right after this DIY commercial that is not for any sponsor other than ourselves. Thank you for watching.
Whether we are already fully in the grip of the techno-capital AI singularity or not, we likely feel as though there's not much we can do.
As allies of future generations, we aren't giving up so easily.
To quote the author of Manifesto, the Mad Farmer Liberation Front, we wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what our life and our children's lives may be.
This fear is not new. The question of technology, media, and institutions became unavoidable in the 20th century. Yet when we think of institutions, the most radical critiques people have encountered came from either Michel Foucault or Jürgen Habermas. These thinkers towered over the theory scene in the 1970s and 80s as radicals took their long march through the institutions.
When it comes to theories of social change, the tendency is to put our hopes in leaving the existing institutions, the current order failing, or some overnight revolution to bring us salvation. Otherwise, we lean in and do the best we can with what's afforded by the existing institutions. Reform or revolution, nothing ever changes, so we keep putting our hopes in education.
So progressives say, if only more people had access to better education, then that would solve the problems. But they have not thought seriously enough about the nature of our institutions, or this thing called education that they offer.
The most radical critiques of schooling that teachers encounter issue from Paulo Freire, Bell Hooks, and Henry Giraud, but none of these ever got to the root of institutions themselves. The theorist who did this was Ivan Illich.
Gaining brief stardom in the 70s, Ivan Illich was the father of the deschooling movement, inspiring hundreds of radical schools and generations of homeschooling parents. But this characterization of his work as the anti-school guy was his ultimate demise, for that only takes account of a surface level of his work. Illich was immediately misunderstood and quickly abandoned.
The issue goes far beyond schools. We spend our entire lives mediated through institutions that totalize, instrumentalize, and reduce humans, all of our possibilities, to something predictable, calculable, and exchangeable, easy to control. The interests of state and capital here overlap entirely. Our desires are thus turned into commodities and our time energy into labor power. Illich doesn't stop here, though, for institutions are not the whole picture.
When people think of schooling today, they think of studying for exams, not learning for the sake of learning. When people think of hospitals, they think of treating illnesses, not human-to-human care and well-being. When people think of transportation, they think of speed and efficiency, not the possibility of sustained, regular, and meaningful connections. When people think of reading, they think of collecting information, not lingering with an idea. The move from schooling to scolae requires serious inquiry into the conditions of possibility for this mode.
I'm calling for a sincere and earnest revival of Illich. While most introductions to Illich limit their engagement to his earlier works, a series of polemics against schooling and institutionalized consumer society, I want to go deeper and lead us to a more robust understanding of who and what a human is for Illich. With his help, we will reopen the question of what we are, what we can be, and the types of lives we are willing to give our time and energy to bring into being, if there are to be humans in the future.
This course begins on June 13th and goes through July 4th, 2024. It meets on Thursdays at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You can enroll at theoryunderground.com/courses/Illich-1, or just click on the link in the description. For those who just want to spend a month really thinking about schooling and institutions, this is a fantastic way to do so. But for those who are looking to go deeper with a community of truth seekers who are going beyond the current theory scene to form an intellectual milieu, this is a fantastic way to do so, because the Theory Underground 2024 conference at the end of October 23rd through 27th is going to have special panels for presentations related to this course. Any student of this course will have opportunities to present, and those presentations can ultimately culminate in submissions that may be accepted into the anthology we are doing on the critique of schooling and education, to be published either at the end of this year or at the beginning of 2025.
Thank you.
We hope to see you there.
Those of us inspired by Žižek do on with social theory, with ideology, with politics, with cinema, right? Cinema studies. They don't think that objet or drive or fantasy or any of these things have anything to tell us about the social field. They're only applicable in the clinic. And I think that's as stupid as it fucking gets. And so I totally get this position where Leon's coming from, where, okay, they're, he views it as these are clinical concepts, help to navigate, the analysis of therapy of an analysan. Totally get it. Cool. But Leon doesn't go to this other extreme that these other guys, these other Lacanians go to. And I think there's lots of reasons why these other guys go to. I don't give a shit to say it. I think they're jealous of theorists. Theorists get all the attention. Theorists are the ones who are invited to do interviews. Theorists are the ones everybody talks about. And sorry, nobody gives a fuck about analysts, except maybe your little cartel of the people you know. But, and here's the thing, people go, you don't respect
or
the
your
work
patients.
I didn't say that. I didn't
or your
say
patients.
I respect the work psychoanalysts do.
Your patients might also respect you, but it's kind of a private relationship there. It's not like something they can go and talk about on streams or something, so it's already kind of and
here's the thing, your basic Lacanian theory, if anybody knows it, you start seeing how pathological they're being about this, where even if what they were saying about us theorists using these concepts is true, they're pathological as fuck about it, because they do this, or at least at one point they were having these rant sessions every day on social media about Lacanian Žižekian theorists. And so you see the repetition, you see all the, and it's like, no, you enjoy this and you're jealous and blah, blah, blah. And as far as just the level of theory, I'm sorry, Freud himself he was talking about social phenomena, civilization and its discontents, right? Freud, and this idea that, and I've told you this, my criticism is they set up a Derridian metaphysics of presence. Like, these signifiers only have this pure meaning within the confines of this little space, and outside of them, they have no meaning. When in fact, psychoanalysis as a discourse emerged within a natural language. It's not like purified of natural language. It's completely embedded in it. And so that's been my issue with it. Now, hold on. All I want to say is because I want to hand this over to Todd, but the one question I had that was like a pivot.
I haven't asked the question yet, but yes, you should do that and then hand it to Todd, and then I'll ask my question after that, but keep going. Yes.
Todd, so with all that, and then I want to ask this and then take it and run. So here's my question, though. This idea that Lacan is just an analyst, training analyst, I know that's what he said, but your position is no, actually, he's primarily a philosopher, even if he doesn't want to fess up to it. And there's evidence for this throughout his work. Like, so, okay, this whole thing that we were talking about with gaze, how our transcendental desire structures the field of visual perception. Okay, the gaze is a theory of how desire shapes visual perception. What clinical purpose does Lacan's theory of the gaze serve exactly? Is Lacan primarily a philosopher or analyst? It's just when you see that he's doing all of this like transcendental theorizing about how structure imbues the visual field, you start going, how is this relevant to clinical practice? It seems more of a psychoanalytic theory of visual perception more than something that an analyst is going to use to get somewhere. So, okay, I'm done.
Yeah, I have a response, but Dave, do you want to go ahead and ask the question?
Yeah. Well, so before you, because maybe I want to add to that a little bit, and just to say where I'm going with this is to say that, okay, so there is gatekeeping. It's a serious issue. Mikey should be able to think. Workers need to be able to like get concepts and think, and people who are trying to keep that from happening, you know, they're not our favorites. But with that said, as a philosophy person, especially someone who came out of, I'd say 10 years of various clubs, discussion groups, courses, classes, I was TA adjunct for various professors. I've done a lot. I've been all over the place, and a lot of these people were analytic philosophers. They didn't take too seriously a lot of the things that I was most interested in, or they didn't even think that philosophy can really deal with them. And you know, there was a phase, I think, where I was just kind of like, well, then screw them, I don't care. But also, I think in the continental philosophy scene, it's common for once a person gets their guy, then they just talk to people who like that guy. It's usually a guy. And then from there, we just kind of assume these are the concepts, and these are the concepts for making sense of the world. Okay, which is great. I think that continental philosophy can help us see and make sense of not just ourselves to live the examined life, but also society and history and social change in a way that no other field is capable of dealing with. And that's why I'm here. But there's this epistemic humility and rigor question that I have when it comes to all of the continental philosophers, right? I mean, especially with you just finished Division 2 of Being in Time. Heidegger goes from being very, very careful in how he's doing everything to really kind of being super he just leans into assertional, I've been to the top of Mount Sinai, and, you know, he kind of goes on guru mode. Okay, well, that becomes very common in continental circles. And at least with Heidegger, he's showing his work in a lot of cases. Like, he doesn't just, and even when it seems like he just threw something out there, well, he already developed it in a previous lecture course, and he kind of assumes that you know that. Mm-hmm. Obviously, with Lacan, it's not so easy to get to the bottom of how he comes to anything. Now, I understand like the typical Lacanian response is, well, you know, it comes from the clinical experience. He was he's there in the clinic, so he comes up with these concepts. It's like, well, I wasn't there. And so.
And he doesn't give us case studies.
He doesn't give us case studies. And so the whole question is like, well, any concept that is really slippery and hard to pin down. There's also this part where you got to be like, okay, but even if it helps me see things a certain way, are there other things that could help me see these things? And so why am I going with this as opposed to these ones? Ultimately, that responsibility is on me as a thinker. I have to sort through that. That kind of looking to other plausible accounts, for instance, is definitely lacking in the continental scene in general. I think it's pretty easy to say that. Mm-hmm. There are exceptions, but that's kind of the concern I raise. Now, this was not really Leon's doing. But he did spark it for myself and probably like another 6 people who are really into this channel. And it's because of our own conscience. We're doing philosophy. So, we want to be taken seriously by people who aren't just Lacanians. And so, when we're using a Lacanian concept, there's this whole question of like its origin, its method, its scope of application or efficacy. And then when we're dealing with things, whether those things translate. And, you can just say, fuck it, I don't give a shit. And I'll take that and be very happy, Todd, for real. But also, I am curious if you've put any thought into these matters. So that's pretty much the question. And then we'll get into the religion and science thing after that.
Yeah, I have put a lot of thought into this, actually. And I find it really interesting that I've had very warm relations with practicing analysts. Like I'll just name a few, like Stephanie Swales, Molly Rothenberg, mostly women, interestingly enough. Manya Steinkühler, just there's numerous, Jessica Dademan, just numerous people. Carol Owens, the people that have invited me, and there's been no issue at all with, and they'll talk about analytic practice, and I'll just say, well, I've been a patient. That's all I can't really speak to that. But so I haven't had so much that issue, but I do. So I think it's also a class thing with Mikey, really. I mean, I think that was part of what's going on there. But that said, I mean, here's the thing I would say, this initial problem, like, I think we could play the game the other way, right? Like you can say, okay, that's fine. We won't use any of these concepts, clinical concepts, but then you can't use any of the concepts Lacan took from German idealism in the clinic. Okay, so sorry. So you don't get to, you don't get to use you actually lose objet a because that's a concept that comes from German idealism. You don't get like signifier signified because that comes from Saussure and linguistics, right? So it seems like there's a whole kind of apparatus that if we play the game the other way, then you lose in the clinic. So I just think and Mikey said this to me, Lacan is a thinker in the German idealist tradition. And I think he shifts between being a Kantian and being an Hegelian. And, my allegiances. So I think there's a certain part I think is the most interesting part, and other part that's less interesting, although I don't mean to disparage Kant, but I also think that's the answer to your ultimate question, right? Like, well, where do these concepts come from? They don't come from the clinic. They don't come from the clinic. I mean, certain ones do, but even those, like even Short Session, his big clinical, I mean, maybe Big Other is the great thing, but he gets Big Other from your guy, from Heidegger. Big Other is Das Mann, right? But basically, psychoanalyze, like unconscious inserted into Das Mann. So even then, even his great clinical advance, and then of course Short Session, but that's quilting point, which is kind of from structural linguistics. So where is it? Where's the great clinical only insight by Lacan? I don't want to play the game the other way. Like, I don't want to take away people's clinical things. They should have all these tools, but just don't come to us and say, okay, you can't think philosophically about these Lacanian concepts because you just can't. You just would have to do it the other direction too, and then you're screwed. You have no Lacanian praxis at all. So I think it's just a question that cannot be addressed. It should not be addressed. And anytime it's brought up, it should just be silenced absolutely, because you can just do the other thing and then they can't say anything. because you can show systematically how all these concepts come from either structural linguistics or from German idealism, right?
Or
With
existentialism.
unconscious is injected in, so that's the psychoanalytic Freudian idea. But that's it. So I think that's what I would say about that. And I think that's also the ground for responding like, okay, you're using a certain Lacanian concept, gaze, I don't know, objet, enjoyment. Where do you get that? Well, I think you get it from this history of German idealist thinking, which is pretty, like even analytic philosophers, there's a divide, of course, on Hegel, but even that's being corrected, I think, because of these people I mentioned, Pippin, Brandon. But on Kant, everybody accepts that Kant makes real art. I mean, they don't love his arguments, but they accept that he makes real arguments. And I agree with you that it's incumbent upon, I had a little debate with Graham Harman. It was maddening to me in certain ways, but maddening to him as well. But I thought it was great because it was really a chance. He's a very nice guy. I like to just what you said, like get out of the certain bubble and not just talk to the converted. And I mean, I don't define myself as Lacanian. I know you probably put me in that group of the Lacanians you had, but I don't see myself that way. But I think that what you said about the rigor of the argument is, I think, absolutely essential, right? Like if you're not doing that, I just was in a little email exchange with a great friend of mine, Sheila Kunkel, Lacanian. She's really Lacanian, and she's arguing about sexuation formulas, right? And I'm just like, and she gives me these quotations that just are a bunch of assertions, and I said, okay. Like, yeah, you could accept they're just assertions. So I feel you on. I feel you. Like I think there is this tendency to just assert it. I love that about Slavoj. I love that about Joan Kopchak. Like they're not asserters, right? Like Slavoj's trying to use. I think he's the best maybe thinker ever of the example, right? Like he uses the example, so he's really showing you how that's what Hegel does, right? Like Hegel converted philosophy, and that's why analytic philosophers don't like him. Like he converted philosophy from the argument to the example, or you could say like from argument to drama, right? Like how is a thing dramatized? That's how we see the truth of it, not how you argue it, because the argument always hides a drama. And if you show the drama, then you show the truth of a thing. And I think that's what Slavoj is so great about doing. I mean, it doesn't always come together in a complete system, which is, I think, people that find him maddening, that's what's maddening, right? Like even this 1,000-page book on Hegel, you're like, wait a minute, what's this thing? Does it fit with this thing? I don't know. Where does it come together? But that's because he's really a thinker of the fecundity of the example for him. And I think that's a basic Hegelian idea, that the drama of the example reveals the truth. And that's different from argument, but I think it's equally, if not more, valid.
That's really good. Thank you. Yeah, no, that gives me a lot to think about, because I mean, the way I was thinking about it was that in the split between continental and analytic philosophy after Kant, it's like caring about argument went the analytic route, except that I wasn't thinking of it in terms of argument. I mean, continentals, they argue. I mean, it's never really like the same. But you're right. No, it's examples. It is by example. That's a really great point. Yeah. And the phenomenology of spirit is just example after example after example, right?
after example after example. Right.
I think even Dave Heidegger, like with that great example of the hammer, a strict analytic philosopher would tell us that's not an argument. But to you and me, okay, it doesn't have the structure of thesis 1, thesis 2, conclusion, but he's describing something. He's trying to show you something, which is he's trying to the best of his ability to give you evidence for the point he's going to make. And so, this idea, part of it is a difference in format. Analytic philosophers love that bullet point style of, moving from proposition to conclusion. And, continental philosophy
there's this book by Michael. Sorry, there's a book by Michael. I think it's by Michael Dunn. It's called Parting of the Ways, and it's about the Husserl-Frege divide. And I think like Husserl is on the side of descriptive phenomenology, so of the example, right? And then Frege is on the side of logical argument. And what's interesting is that they both reach a certain, like, phenomenology reaches this problem of the unconscious that it can't get past, and then Frege reaches this problem of Russell's paradox. So they each run into this fundamental barrier, right? That they can't get beyond. And I think we still are wrestling with those two problems in both of those fields.
That's a really good example, because those two actually talked to each other. They wrote letters to each other.
They did. Right. Exactly.
They thought about their problems. Now they didn't. It's not like they were buddies, and it's not like they went super hard together. But they did try to, oh yeah, what are you working on? Oh, I'm working on something similar. There was a bit of a conversation there, whereas they're direct inheritors of those projects, Heidegger and Bertrand Russell, no talking.
Never
it's
talked.
done.
Right.
And never again shall the twain meet, unless Negarestani or Johnston is indeed overcoming this divide. Both of them are attempting to do so. Power to them. And now I know we really don't have that much more time here, but the science of religion question, I guess, when you just go to example instead of argument, when epistemology kind of gets thrown out the door, it opens another door, right? For kind of, I would say, it's not reason based anymore. It's just, it really does kind of like, hey, come on in, gurus. And so people really can kind of come in and just start using concepts that sound smart. And now they're not trying to, it's one thing to say, this is why I think this. It's another thing to say, this is why I think this, and I think this is a reasonable position, and other people should be able to come to this position if they at least agree with certain operating assumptions, right? And now there's a fear, or maybe it's just an actual thing, that there is this resurgence of religion. And now, of course, if it's a fear, then that's by people who think that's a really bad thing. Obviously, Adrian Johnston, he does not like it. He's a hardline atheist and materialist. And so that's, I was asking him questions about that. I was asking Dwayne questions about that. And I had other people on throughout the day, and I always kind of brought up the religion question. And, this tension between religion and science that really emerges prior to the time of Descartes, but that he really is addressing, especially in his discourse on method, because he's mediating this divide. And of course, Kant was trying to mediate this divide. It doesn't seem to be going away. It seems to be polarizing. And I wonder, what is the role of Lacanian psychoanalysis in all of this, culturally, socially, now that it has become a part of the zeitgeist for making sense of things? And now that we do have Lacanians who are really into theology, bringing that stuff in, either Boothby or Mark Gerard Murphy, who I hope to have on soon to talk about these things, right? Like, these guys are...
Peter Rollins.
Peter Rollins, great example.
Sure.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I guess I kind of just want a pulse check on you, and then we'll come back to it later. But like atheism, religion, science, epistemology, philosophy, what is to be done?
Yeah. I mean, Adrian, it's interesting. So Adrian, I'm really good friends with Adrian, but he's much more atheistic than I am, and sees my book on Hegel as a what would he call it? Like a derivation from, because it's very Christian, right? Like, I mean, it just is. It laments this way that Hegel's Christianity is written out of left-wing Hegelianism. So, yeah, I mean, I don't have the same anti-religion take that other people do, simply because I don't believe that it's possible to not be religious. Like, I think, so I think there are certain people that think religion is manipulation by priests, right? Like that was Freud's position, to be honest. That was Freud's. It's absolutely his position. That was not Lacan. I mean, I think I just said I'm not Lacanian on most issues, but on religion, I think I'm closer. Although I'm more aligned with, you mentioned Rick Boothby. I mean, he and I basically think the same thing. I mean, we have these little private things where we're like, would you call yourself Christian? And we kind of go, and by my two twin boys are like, you can't call yourself Christian. Your idea of what it means is just too removed from what most people think. So you shouldn't be saying that. But I don't know. I feel like I don't mind reclaiming that. So he and I kind of go through that. But I think that that one of what things that Lacan says is that, and one of the ways he goes beyond Freud is, so Freud famously said religions should be classified as the mass delusions of humanity, right? So psychosis is religion. Lacan thinks, no, actually, and I think that religion is a way in which we address ourselves to some kind of abyss within the other, right? Like something that cannot be grasped, or something fundamentally unknown. And that's what religion. So yeah, okay, of course, priests manipulated and televangelists manipulated, and all these Alabama Supreme Court manipulated, of course. But the fundamental religious opening is, I think, actually, and this is Hegel's point as well, a very radical one. And I think that Christ is a radical figure, and I think that we should never, ever give ground on that. I just think it's not. I think that and I think Peter Rollins is a good figure in this. I can't tell you how much I love Peter and what he does. Like, he's just a great guy, and really important, I think, in the contemporary world. And and he does all these different things. Like, he's like Lent without God. I mean, he's maybe more atheistic than I am, but I think it's one of the things is atheism for Lent. But it's all in the context of the church, and I think there's something pretty good about that project. Anyway, so that's all. I mean, I think that I don't see religion as avoidable, and I think the way in which science becomes a religion for most liberals today is a really lamentable thing. When I hear people say trust science, I want to puke, because look, here's why. Because science is obviously, I believe in science, believe in science. I'm not an idiot. But I think that the questions that science pursues are themselves ideologically determined. That's why science doesn't have a subject, right? Like it's absolutely key to science, or else there would be no science, right? So it doesn't matter. In other words, Einstein discovers special relativity, right? But it didn't matter that he did. Like, somebody else could have. Werner Heisenberg could have. Kurt Gödel, it doesn't matter, right? Like, that's the whole, and someone else had to be able to validate it after Einstein. So Einstein's subjectivity is indifferent to the scientific discovery. But the questions that science pursues they're politically determined. Like, people will say like, oh, well, science shows that, I don't know, that there's a gene for alcoholism, let's just say, right? Like, okay, why are we looking in the genetic material for the cause of alcoholism? Why is that a thing we're looking for? And if we didn't look for it, then we obviously wouldn't have found it. Even if it exists, I don't know if it exists. I don't know the answer to this question. You see what I'm saying? Like, we could be focused on a whole other thing scientifically, right? Think about all the vast regions of knowledge that are just left vacant.
It's kind of an example of gaze, right?
Exactly. Yes. Like, our desire is shaping where our scientific inquiry, like, think about how many, there's probably at the University of Vermont, there's probably 600 neuroscience majors, right? So why aren't there 600 astrophysics majors? Well, because NASA's going under, and no one's, you see what I'm saying? Like, there's not, that's not where we're focused. But to me, that's more interesting. Like, why aren't there 600 quantum mechanics majors? Much more, or quantum gravity, much more interesting, right? Like, they're quantum gravity theorists are like, maybe time doesn't exist at all, even in this kind of, it's only this Kantian as a form of our intuition, right? So that's pretty radical, but there's not this of focus on that. Why? Because we can't create pharmaceuticals or whatever out of it, right? So,
and this is
not
where
that I'm against pharmaceuticals, but it's ideological.
Well, I mean, I think we all have questions about the industry itself, but the
the industry, right?
Yeah,
that's all
for sure. Well, bringing that's what I was going to say about science is like, thinking about the book Disciplined Minds by, I think his name's Jeffrey Schmidt or something like that. Do you know that book, Disciplined Mind?
I don't know it, but I'm going to look it up. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely check it out. It's all about, it's not just, scientists, they have to get grants, that's obviously part of it. So, this gaze, it's like, okay, well, nobody's just interested in X, Y, or Z things that are on offer for them to research. Well, who is interested in that? And he traces back the money in a lot of these cases. It's the weapons manufacturing industry. So it's like you're over here doing infrared stuff and it's really cool. And you're looking at all these different kinds of animals that might or might not like use infrared in various ways. You're trying to learn from them. And it's just fascinating. But who's funding you? You're like, oh, it's just this one entity. But if you go back a couple more steps, oh, it's actually it's the weapons manufacturing industry, right? And it's the same thing with.
Think about what we were concerned about with nuclear physics, right? Like I'm just thinking about this movie Oppenheimer because it's so much. But think about how much was invested in that could have been invested in so many other more interesting questions of physics, right? And then it just wasn't. So it's not. So give me a break on this. Like it's just this. Like the whole inquiry is trust science. It's objective. It's just that's just a liberal lie. It's not true. It's not true. Again, what they discover, they're not cheating, but the area that they're focused on, and science has real results that are different from mythology and all this other kind of crap, right? Like it is really something. It is really a thing that's different, but it's not. It's not just a neutral thing at its starting. And I think that has to absolutely be understood. Otherwise you're spouting off an totally ideological positioning.
Couldn't agree more.
Really, the connection to science is really great. And so I guess one thing I was going to say earlier, Todd, is part of the issue with gays and why I think it's so tricky for people to get is it's like, and I'm speaking as like a student here, we want existential examples of gays. We want how it relates to science, how it relates to religion. And like a connection like that really helps illuminate it in a broader sense. And so I think that's the issue, is that most of the time examples are either cinematic or analysts just theorize about it and never even provide an example.
Or paintings, right? Like I think like David is right. Like this is an example. If you look at science, it's a concrete example of how the gaze shapes what we're even looking for, right? Like we don't even see all these other, a few people see them, but basically no one sees this whole other thing that's like could be more important than anything else because we're not even looking for it. We don't,
right.
There are fields of scientific inquiry we don't have names for. We don't have majors and we don't have names for because they're not lucrative or interesting to people, right? And I'm not going to put a judgment on it. It could be just not interesting to people, but it's still a possible field.
Dave, do I have time for one little thing real quick?
Rudy's in the group here and had asked a question. I don't know if you saw it. He also shared it in the live stream chat. I kind of thought it would be cool to let him actually ask it, but I also, I do want you to be able to do that.
But here's the thing. I just want to make a comment. Like we can bring this up with Todd next time we talk to him. But all I'll say is, okay, so first off, everybody, if you're interested in this whole thing with Lacanian psychoanalysis and religion, there was this debate between Adrian Johnston and Richard Boothby that occurred about a year ago. Andrew and Nick, our friends, were there at Duquesne for this debate. And so you have these two Lacanians and they disagree. Like Todd was saying, he's more on Richard's side, which I was telling you this week. Richard Boothby has to be on one of these streams at some point. He's completely relevant to everything you were talking about today. This, Dave, that on a philosophical level, I tend more with Adrian. And so, Todd, the only thing I want you to comment real quick, but we can bring this up at another time. It's just there's a way of viewing Lacanian psychoanalysis as part of its ultimate aim, you could say, even in a clinical setting, is to help the subject come to terms with the fact that there is no big other, which you could say is the ultimate atheist gesture. Because what you're saying, you're trying to get us to lose our investment in higher authority. There's nobody who can actually tell me how I should be, what I should desire. it's all groundless, and I have to take a stand. Like, this is the ethics of psychoanalysis. I eventually, even though my desire is obviously infused by the other's desire, part of it is, no, I'm taking a stand and taking responsibility for my desire, even if it's imbued by the other, right? I act on my desire in this sense, right? Which involves reckoning with the fact there is no external other. I shouldn't put Christ above me. I shouldn't put Buddha above me. I shouldn't put Yahweh above me. They can't help me when it comes to my desire or how I should live. I have to take that responsibility for myself. So in a way, isn't that the ultimate atheist gesture that most religious fundamentalists would absolutely despise? Is that there is no absolute authority. Stop investing in these figures.
But that's what's so great about Christianity, right? Because it shows how Christ himself is a divided subject who dies on the cross, right? Like, that's the great, like, in Christ, God has to come down to earth and suffer and be divided like a regular human. And that's what God is. So I think that's, to me, you just gave the great argument for Christianity in your argument for atheism. So,
but you know that but this is
okay.
as a
I know.
Like the average Christian, Christ, you can't throw any doubt on anything. You can't go,
they're heretics, man.
Arguments. He made assertions. You can't even do anything like that. Like,
they're heretics.
You cannot challenge the authority of Christ.
Yeah, they're heretics. They're Christian heretics, man.
Okay, well, yeah, we'll get into that more at some point. But Dave, Rudy, okay, I'm done.
You're muted, Dave.
Oh, all of that talking and I was not even heard. Rudy, I was saying, calling Rudy. I was trying to talk over them, but I'm glad it didn't work out because that would have sounded so rude. But I was saying we will get into these things for sure in the near future, hopefully.
Sure.
But Rudy, if you're there, you can ask your question really quick. But we've got Anna Greenspan joining us in about, well, hopefully 5 to 6 minutes. So if you can ask your question really quick, then Todd can kind of incorporate it into his closing statements.
Thank you. I was thinking about, because Mike, you were asking this about what is the desire of the I, and so I was thinking that is the desire of the I to miss/recognize, because I was thinking that, like, even in the biological function, we now think that there's this mirror thing in the eye happening. Yeah, it's put on its head and then the brain turns it around. So that's what I was thinking about and asking.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, so Lacan's whole theory, and I think this is the theory of, this is where psychoanalysis really has an insight, right? Is that the biological function undergoes this encounter with signification, the signifier, and that creates a distortion of the biological function. But what I love about your question is that your point is the biological function itself is distorted, right? Like there's something that isn't, it doesn't just, things aren't just working out clearly. There's this reversal, this camera obscura effect, even of the biological function. So I think that's nice, the way in which that the distortion isn't just, this is the point I think Hegel makes, that the distortion isn't just subjectivity. There's a subjectivity is in a way formulating, making present, making us aware of this fundamental distortion in our as entities.
Hey, Dave, you're not muted.
Okay, good to know. For real? Okay.
Yeah.
You hear me talking?
We
Okay.
were just getting,
Yeah. Anyway, I'll wrap up in 2 seconds. So I think, thanks for having me, and Mikey, thanks for the discussion. So we talked a lot about gaze, and I think it's really obviously an important concept, but I really think that the defense of psychoanalysis or the use of psychoanalysis outside the clinic. But I think that maybe the most important idea is that, and I think this touches on the science question, is that there's this slant in every way in which we encounter the world, right? And so what psychoanalysis, I think the best thing about it, what it wants to make us aware, that we can become aware of that slant, but we can't control that slant. So that slant is our unconscious. And so we can recognize it when it takes us by surprise. So gaze would be a case where we encounter this object where it all of a sudden it throws off our world. The other things that do that are the joke, the slip. I think the slip is maybe the great example. My spouse Hillary Neroni was saying to me that the gaze is like the slip in the visual field. It's like the Freudian slip in the visual field. I thought that was a great point. And so I think that's the thing that I would want to underline as I sign off. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you so much, Todd. It was an honor to have you.
Take care. Have a good
Everybody
luck
will
for the
be
last
right.
one.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And we'll be right back after this. Play the longer one here.
Thinking is super uncool, and that's why you should do it. It's just like almost anything that
we cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, a place for workers with earbuds who are tired of the bullshit and just want to get down to it. Big ideas, rigorous thinking, and ultimately liberation from necessity.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation. Theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
Theory Underground is coming to a city near you. Besides a commitment to publishing certain underground theorists and popularizing certain fundamental concepts, we have toured the United States and are touring Europe to promote our ideas, courses, and publications.
You've been reading Underground Theory.
Amazing book. I'm a publisher and an editor. I run and review books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Okay, picture this scene. America, early 2021. An Amazon warehouse worker arises from the emerging underground theory internet scene to create spaces for untimely topics and concerns that are too often neglected or kept in isolation today. Joined by a revolving cast of underground theorists, academics, and critics, he establishes what will become Theory Underground, a teaching, research, and publishing platform by and for working class intellectuals, autodidacts, and academics who want to do more than they're able to do within the confines of academia. That warehouse worker's name is David McKerracher, and his book Timenergy is his first major contribution to the world of theory. It was recently reprinted with a foreword by none other than Slavoj Žižek, who also contributed to Theory Underground's latest book.
My Bible, it's an excellent book.
A collection of essays called Underground Theory.
What you just heard is an excerpt from the Strange Exiles podcast, episode 23, where Bram from Strange Exiles interviewed me and Mikey. For those who don't know, Mikey is the author of the Dangerous Maybe blog. We are publishing one of his books here shortly at Theory Underground. He's also a lecturer at Theory Underground, and he's someone I've been friends and a collaborator with for over 10 years. But most importantly for you all, he's a fantastic lecturer, and it's a crime that he has to do wage labor right now. One of the long-term goals of Theory Underground has been now for a couple of years to hashtag free Mikey. That is something that I've been really pushing, but first, obviously, I have to get freed myself, so the two of us are able to do this because, as Mikey said, build it and they will come. Well, I tried and I built a website and platform. I had my own app and everything, but it's been really buggy and it's more than one person can handle, and that's, a really good lesson for me. And so for now, what we're doing is moving it to a temporary intermediary platform until we are able to get some more serious funding. And ultimately, we want to be in a place like this, a real brick and mortar digital nomadic mecca where people can come from all over the world. But also, the app was really expensive, and so by quitting it, I am now able to save a lot of money, and with the help of my patrons and the students at Theory Underground, especially the monthly subscribers, I am officially able to quit Amazon and do Theory Underground full time. So thank you so much, everybody. This is one huge step forward With that said, several subscribers did not migrate from the now defunct app to the new setup, and I'm guaranteed to lose people over time. So please, if you want to get involved, become a subscriber. If you're not even sure what this is all about but are just curious, then I've added Tier 0 and Tier 1 for very basic kinds of access to what we are doing behind the scenes. If you don't have any time or energy to get involved, but you do have some money to help support this project from afar, then please check out the Patreon. My patrons over at Patreon make the podcast and public YouTube possible. Thank you. As for once-in-a-lifetime events, check out the new poster for the American Idiots Theory Underground European Book Tour. Paris, Brussels, Berlin, Vienna, Linz, Krakow, Glasgow, London, and Oxford from April 27th to May 25th, 2024. 2 events are already fully booked out. Save a seat at an event by getting in contact with us ASAP. Finally, the call for proposals to our conference in Mexico.
What's up, everybody? TUCon 2024 update here. It's not happening in Mexico anymore, but it is still happening on October 24th through the 27th.
The change was made because a lot of the people that wanted to attend and that were expected to attend said they could probably afford to travel if they had more time advance notice. So save up for June 2025.
If you have to choose, right? Because this one that is happening this year is happening physically in Boise, Idaho, because we have a lot of collaborators and fellow travelers and co-instructors there. But you can attend virtually for this one. You won't be able to attend virtually next year. So yeah, if you have to choose, attend physically in 2025. The call for proposals already happened. The writing workshop for proposals already happened. You can still get the links to both of those. Just shoot us a message and ask for those links. We'll get you those. And the form goes live on June 1st, and the deadline is June 15th. So if you're attending physically, let me know ASAP.
Get in on it.
All right. Finally, last little thing here is to say thank you so much to my patrons over at Patreon. The Patreon is for people who are too busy to be students or subscribers at Theory Underground, but who want to see more of this free content on the podcast and YouTube channel for Theory Underground. You are the ones who see something of value in the free content being made available here, and you want to see more of it. Your patron pledges at Patreon are a real motivator for me. So thank you so much, especially to Marilyn Lawrence, Bert Vanderkar, Carl Vanderlip, Nikolai, Sakil, Zoxandra, Darian, Max, Al, Alagiri, Ben, as well as several others, including Court Atlantic, Louise, Matt Payne, Neil, Simon, and Yiz.